I'll be discussing video games and learning, teaching and participatory culture in the digital age. It's written by Kurt Squire from the University of Wisconsin, and in my opinion, he's captured a number of important lessons for those of us engaged in video game design and education, whether we are in educational or commercial fields. He has demonstrated to teachers, parents, academians like myself, the possible positive outcomes of gaming. As Squire mentions in his prologue, this easily could have been 3 separate books on designing educational games, teaching with games, and mobile media and education. So I would say if I have a central critique for his work, it's that by dividing his focus in this way, it can be challenging to gather what I wanted as an academic instructor from it, but as a general starter text, this book succeeded in its aims. Much like Mark Prinsky's book, Don't Bother Me, Mom, I'm Learning, published in 2006, Squire works to dispel sort of the popular myths and negative images around video games, video game culture, the idea of the waste of time, the brain rot, etc. Throughout the book, readers have the opportunity to see through the eyes of a true aficionado, someone who has both academic pedigree and video game expertise, the evolution of video games in our culture, why millions of students flock to the computer screen each day, and it gives us the opportunity to envision the potential of these emerging technologies for deliberate educational game. Squire's primary focus on video games is the ones that he's personally experienced, which I thought was to the benefit of the book. It focuses and allows him, again, to demonstrate expertise. He doesn't wander off the path of his own knowledge. However, it does neglect a substantial sector of the field, and this does somewhat hinder the generalizability of his conclusions. For the future of educational gaming, sort of the tech leadership and change aspect of the book, Squire proposes 2 promising pathways beyond traditional classroom use for video games. He envisions an endless array of possibilities in virtual schools, specifically where learning is accessible everywhere. He also contends that museums and other informal institutions, say a library like mine, are perfect venues for inspiring game inspiration and participation, creating educational games and educational routes through games to, scholarship, education, etc. There is something to be learned from the book by absolutely any reader. For myself, a familiarity with mainstream games and gaming terminology made reading it much easier. For educators, connections between characteristics of a good game and scientific habits represented in the text but are not explicitly discussed. I thought that was a clear opportunity for science educators particularly. The promising outlook on gaming opportunities in education and suggestions for game use and design for students in general are useful, though regardless of field or discipline. While Squire provides ample evidence for learning inherent in good games, his evidence is specifically focused on social studies and civics. In his efforts to make the book more amenable to all audiences, again, he tends to skim over data and statistics that I, as an academician, would prefer to see. But to his credit, he forewarns us of this very early in the book. And data is cited often, just not necessarily clearly enough for us to determine the case that he's trying to make. Nevertheless, non-significant evidence and anecdotes are used very well throughout the text, and Squire keenly addresses this challenge to educational gaming, this piece where we don't quite have the evidence piece together yet because there hasn't been enough research on the topic. There are so many variables at play, is the thing in education. So many variables at play in the classroom. So when a new form of technology is introduced, it can be very difficult to prove that it's useful. It is easy to feed off. This is an easy read. Squire's passion and enthusiasm for games and the lessons they hold are it's infectious. Yet some readers may find his regular anecdotal references to a few games, especially the Civilization series, to be overly narrowly focused. However, these repeated references do help to ground a consistent argument for the potential of games that is accessible even to technophobes. He's often got a tongue-in-cheek sort of humor in his writing, and Squire, I would argue, disarms even the most resistant readers of their skepticism towards the educational merits of video games while acknowledging common perspectives surrounding video games. Again, those sort of negative attitudes I discussed before. One of my favorite lines is when he greets the reader with the sentiment that game people think educators are lame, and educators think game people are hyper-violent, misogynist, destroying all that is good in the world. In conclusion, I highly recommend this read to any educator, librarian, academician interested in introducing video games into their classrooms and thinking mindfully through the process of which games should be selected, created, or explored through other avenues. Thank you very much for joining me for my discussion today.